Today on the podcast, it's my pleasure to welcome Harsha Rajasimha. Harsha is the CEO of Jiva Informatics Solutions. Welcome, Harsha.
My pleasure.
Can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Don. I am a genomics data scientist by training, trained at Virginia Tech and National Institutes of Health and FDA, going through my postdoctoral career. And I have worked for a number of genome sequencing companies, mostly as a data scientist and turned into executive. I've also founded a couple nonprofit charities focused on accelerating research for rare diseases, as they are much neglected and have unique challenges with the sparse distribution of patients. And also the founder CEO of Jiva Informatics Solutions, which is a technology startup having the same goal of accelerating clinical research, but also increasing diversity and access to clinical trials from wherever the patients are located.
It's so important today. Well, first of all, I should apologize. I really butchered your name at the very beginning of this. I know we're live, and some folks might look at this. So my apologies for that.
No, you are good.
But it's exciting to get to have you on.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Jiva Informatics Solutions. What is it? What that they do? What sort of vision for the company as you started it?
Absolutely. Jiva started about 3 years ago, came out of my healthcare life science consulting role, talking to big pharma executives in their research and development houses. What we heard from everyone is it's very inefficient, it's old-fashioned. We rely on face-to-face interactions within the four walls of clinical trial sites, where patients are expected to visit every single time to have face-to-face interactions during a clinical trial, whether it's phase 1, 2, and 3, during which may take about 5 to 7 years before a treatment can be submitted for regulatory approvals. And the chances of a drug or a treatment receiving FDA approval is about 10%. So 9 out of 10 fail. So how cool is that? And so that's basically where the industry has been for many decades now. And we saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic, that obviously has a significant potential to change in the speed at which we got the COVID-19 vaccine. And the opportunity is now to really democratize that and make it more widely available for a variety of diseases for both vaccines and other treatment modalities. But when we first started Jiva about 3 years ago, we have so far interviewed more than 2,000 stakeholders of clinical trials and asked them, what keeps you up at night? What are your major challenges? And no surprise in hearing patient recruitment is the biggest bottleneck in clinical trials. That's a well-known fact. Within that, many reasons for why that's the case. And some of it is the ecosystem, some of it is the same old-fashioned approach, and also the risk-averse nature of the life science industry, and also highly regulated aspect of this industry. So we started listing out key challenges and started building a scalable technology platform that can help address these systematic issues that have been persistent in this industry.
So in terms of I guess there are a couple of things that I picked up on that you said, right? So one part being sort of the diversity of clinical trials being one, and then the second aspect being that in the one thing that comes instantly to mind during COVID isn't necessarily the COVID, but it's sort of immunosuppressed patients in a clinical trial having to go into an office with COVID. That that is much more something that comes to mind for me. And so did you see a lot more sort of interest and traction come about from that? And then secondly, on the diversity side, how are you recruiting for patients of diverse populations?
We are absolutely seeing a significant change in how we are now seeing inbound requests and inbound conversations coming from sponsors, CROs, and sites asking for remote tools and technologies and curiosity about what we are doing and so on. While we were having to chase people, get them to speak and share their challenges earlier. So the people are looking for alternatives. They are being more open minded to change and adopting new tools and technologies to bring clinical trials to patients where they are, rather than expecting patients to come to where the trials are have been. That's the historical mindset. So absolutely big change for better, the silver lining of the pandemic, as we call it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just think I look at the sort of things that came about, right? I mean, I know for me personally, I increased the amount of bandwidth capacity that I have in my house for the internet. But in addition to that, I mean, we've seen tools like Zoom get improved and other remote capabilities start to get used more. There's still things that I wish that we could have more face-to-face meetings. I was telling somebody the other day, I miss being able to go to a conference room and put sticky notes on a wall and think through a problem. Now we have to try and do that with remote tools like Miro and other capabilities that tools like Lucid Spark bring about. But I mean, in totality, do you see that your clients primarily say that this capability then completely fulfills what they would normally do for patient selection and recruitment, or are they still having to alternate methods as well?
It's interesting, Don. So it's a mix of, yes, we need technology and new tools to remotely engage and enroll patients. A big part of this is education and trust building activity that has to occur on a internet environment, as opposed to in person, makes it many times harder to build trust. And so, what that means is better tools for multimedia, omni-channel engagement, which has video, telemedicine, text, and email, and also graphics and so on, to be able to inform and educate patients before enrollment. And once study volunteers or patients choose to enroll in a clinical study, going through electronic signatures and so on instead in lieu of paper, and then ability to keep them engaged and uh, interested in the study throughout the duration of a study in a virtual environment is even more harder. So it's not aspect of throwing a bunch of tools and technology at the problem, but doing it in a very thoughtful, methodical, and systematic way. I anticipating friction points at every step in this process and addressing them before they occur, which is not always easy, especially as this new change has been adopted in the very recent months. So it's a very iterative and continuous learning that needs to occur in this process, and willingness to um, be nimble in addressing some of these friction points and resolving them as we actually build out while we are build a parachute after jumping off the cliff, kind of a thing.
Well, that's a bit risky, but at the same time, yes, I completely understand your point. Um, so you're also the founder and chairman of IndoEU Share. It's a nonprofit organization focused on diseases of Indian origin in the USA. What can you tell us about why you founded this organization?
Yeah, mainly as a genomics data scientist coming through NIH and various academic research institutions, having published number of articles mainly focused on data. Most of these public databases are filled with Caucasian data, which is great starting point. Of course, all the research funding A majority of it comes from the United States, federally funded programs, as well as European Union. What that means is these databases have significantly lacked diversity in terms of the genetics of Asian, African, Hispanic, or Latino. All these different genetics are very important for science, and those are very underrepresented in all these databases, let alone the clinical data. Most of the countries still do not have electronic medical records. We got most of the US EMRs implemented around 2014 timeframe because of a presidential mandate at that time. And so we are still lacking clinical, genetic, and other data sets from rest of the world. Now, India and the Indian subcontinent is home for about quarter of the world's population when you combine that with the US population. So we founded IndoEUS organization for rare diseases to help bridge those gaps and help foster cross-border collaborations and research, which in my opinion is critical to truly achieve diversity. And this became truly obvious, right, for all of us during the pandemic. You can't have uh, 40% Asian population represented in a COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial when you run the trial mostly in US and Europe. You got to the Asian population in US is 5%. So even if you recruit disproportionately, you can still get 10% of Asian representation. But when you look at the on a global scale, the Asian Indian population is 18% of the world, right? And so you got to cover for different populations so that when a COVID-19 vaccine is approved by FDA, it's literally approved for the entire world, which
Right.
means the entire diversity of the world's population needs to be represented during clinical trials. That's the only way to build trust with the general public and get everyone to take vaccine as safe and effective.
Yeah, so I have a very amateurish question here. So when you recruit, let's say, people of Indian origin in the United States for a clinical trial, are they still representative, I guess, of people that are still living in the continent of India?
Um, yes and no, right? So they do have the genetic aspect of it, but the
Mhm.
environmental aspect is very different.
Sure.
A person living in Indian weather and environmental conditions is very different from someone living here. So no, you are absolutely right. So you bring up a very good point, that uh, they are very different, and so it's, yeah, the global diversity is critical. And within the rare disease context, although we use COVID-19 as an example, the nonprofit is focused solely on rare diseases, and so diversity is even more lacking in rare disease compared to other common conditions when it comes to clinical research and databases. And so many of these rare diseases are single gene disorders. And if you find people get a disease if they inherit even one pathogenic mutation from their parents. Uh,
Wow.
One single nucleotide is all it takes to cause a severe disease or even death, early death sometimes. So
And
that's where the
can you give us
nonprofit
some
came up.
examples of the rare diseases that you've helped with?
We have since formation. I was also been the co-founder of the National Organization for Rare Diseases in India about 9 years ago, and the Indo-US Rare a couple years ago. We now have 24 patient groups that represent more than 500 rare diseases, collectively accounting for about 20 plus thousand patient members of these organizations. Although individually each disease is rare, collectively they affect millions of people. And if you take all the rare diseases combined, it's equivalent to a diabetes, in terms of the more than 300 million people affected globally with these rare diseases. So examples like cystic fibrosis is one example, very well known. It's a huge success story. 1983 is when the CFTR gene mutation was discovered to cause the cystic fibrosis disease. And in 2014 or so is when the first FDA approved treatment came, with almost after 30 years. So there are muscular dystrophies, and Rett syndrome, severe neurological and neuromuscular diseases like spinal muscular atrophy, and GNE myopathy, and several others. So they are all there are patient groups that focus on these individual diseases or subsets of diseases, and they are member organizations of Indo-US Rare. We help patient groups in US connect with their counterparts in India and vice versa. And when they strengthen their patient registries with more data, everybody wins. All patients win, irrespective of where they are. And that helps advance and discover new scientific things, new genetics of the disease and symptoms and so on. That's really the goal, is to help more cross-border engagements and collaborations.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like amazing work, right? I mean, I've certainly not done any work in this particular space, and it's very interesting to me, to hear somebody that wants to be involved and be involved at a charity level. Overall, is there a reason that you decided that, hey, look, I'm going to create an organization here, to help serve, um, you know people around the world?
Absolutely. Like most people in the rare disease advocacy space, are driven by personal family inspiration. I am no different. I had a child that was born with Edward syndrome back in 2012, and that the child passed away within few days after birth.
Oh,
And so that was a eye-opening experience, as I was already involved as a researcher in rare retinal diseases, rare cancers, and other uh, rare diseases already. But when you go through that human experience, it exposes you to the other side of the same coin, and that's very inspiring. So I basically then started looking at how my unique perspective of having grown up in India, having educated in United States, worked at NIH, FDA, and having seen the value and benefit of clinical research in real time, success stories, how it can change lives and impact human health globally, right? And that happens in front of our eyes, especially when you are in a place like NIH. That's what you see and breathe on a daily basis. So that was a combination of my career and my personal experience together inspired me to start Indo-US Rare, mainly to take the good to the rest of the world, which we all enjoy, being privileged to be in the United States. But I think people are people everywhere, and if we can take these things to India and other countries, I think India is one example of low and middle income countries, which I think entire Latin America, there is a lot of opportunity. Africa is a huge opportunity. There are various other aspects of this rare disease that also need to be addressed, which means multiple stakeholders have to come together to solve these problems. We think we can be facilitators and connectors, and just bring the right people, like-minded people together.
well, first of all, I'm sorry for your pain. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. But it's amazing to hear how you turned that into, just an amazing tribute as well. So,
Thank you.
thank you for that as well. And so I'd like to turn a little bit back to Jiva and, kind of what you're doing with Jiva Informatics Solutions. Um, Overall, can you tell me just a little bit about the platform? So how is it based? Is it a SaaS platform, or you know much more of a platform that people install themselves, or how does it work?
Yeah, so absolutely. When we looked at the current space, when we started 3 years ago, there was a number of a la carte tools, right? A tool for iPad-based tool for informed consent at the clinic, or a telemedicine platform, or a video conferencing platform like the Microsoft Teams or Zoom or and so on. And they all have to be in the context of a clinical trial or a clinical research, highly secure, compliant, all in one login, and not have to juggle between 30 different logins. Like clinical researchers told us, literally they have to juggle between 30 different logins to get one study continue to run smoothly. And so the research teams take significant burden. There is a patient centricity is a major theme in clinical research for right reasons, but as much as we need to reduce the burden on patients having to travel to the clinic to do routine stuff which can easily be done from where they are without travel, we also need to reduce the burden on the site staff. So essentially what we developed is to address gaps in the industry with a single scalable web accessible software which is hosted on the secure Amazon cloud, which essentially works on a per clinical trial fit model, because every trial is unique, has its own protocol and complexity. And we heard sponsors say every clinical trial feels like the first ever trial undertaken by mankind. So it's like building a brand new airport for one plane to take off, and then you build another airport for the next plane to take off, and so on. Not an exaggeration in many cases. And so we heard this from people at Novartis and Pfizer and some very large organizations. So companies that have been doing this for 100 years. And so it's think about the smaller and mid-sized biotech pharma companies that are still innovative, small, nimble with less resources. They have to be more innovative. And so we have developed a SaaS platform which is modular, which means they get all of these tools in a single login. They don't have to use multiple logins. And two, they can only pay for the modules they need. So they don't have to start with a very high price point, because it's an all or none approach. So we break it up into a la carte or integrated.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's and when they have to start a second study, now they don't have to start from scratch. They already have the infrastructure. It's managed on the cloud. There is no need for having IT teams and large racks of servers to manage. Very little hardware, very little technical resources necessary. With zero programming, they can configure the study and get the study started within a couple weeks, and entirely manage, provide the flexible research options, right? This you will, if you talk to even couple clinical researchers randomly, they will tell you how inflexible the historical tools have been. So providing the ability to have patients choose whether they want to go in person and see the doctor this time, or would they prefer to do it remotely on a telemedicine or a video call. That's huge, and that's the level of flexibility that we are enabling within a single SaaS platform.
I mean, it seems so important for a lot of different areas, especially whenever you have clinical trials that could take billions of dollars. I know I've spoken to one researcher who has said, look, just for a simple mouse study, they're saying, that it could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just for that, and then now all of a sudden you get to the human clinical trial standpoint, and to have all these different tools that you're having to try and manage, to try and get to your patients that could mean the success or failure of the drug, is absolutely critical for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 2.6 billion is the cost of bringing one successful treatment to market. That's because 9 out of 10 fail.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've done these sort of presentations before where I tell somebody, okay, so we have 100 possibilities. Here's what 100 possibilities looks like on day one, and then as we go through the first round of trials, we're going to see 30% drop off. The next round is 33% drop off, and I think the third round, I think you have as much as 70% drop off. I mean, it's unbelievable to me to watch how rapidly you get down to, okay, you have one successful, potential, drug that could make it out of, 100. So
Yeah.
pretty amazing. So in terms of, just the platform itself, it sounds like to implement it could take a very short time as well. Is that correct?
You mean to get a study started? Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody came to Jiva today to say, hey, look, we want to use your tools. How quickly could they get up and running?
In minutes, basically, they get a login. It's a matter of creating a login username, and then they set their own password and a two-factor authentication. They get up and running immediately. They do have to configure their study protocol within the software. And if they have a team, they can delegate user access to another 3, 4, 5, 10 people who can all collaborate on the same platform and configure, divide, and conquer. There may be survey forms, like ECRFs or the case report forms or patient reported outcomes questionnaires or informed consent, and a few other study workflow like onboarding, recruitment workflow. All of this can be configured within days, essentially. And once they are, configured it, tested a little bit internally, and then they are ready to launch. And beauty is, you need to go online and enroll and find patients through social media channels. I don't want to bring up the infamous Facebook, but that's where a lot of patients still are. Um, and so, especially in rare diseases, there are patient communities that have been nurtured over the years. They may have their own registries, a list of email addresses and phone numbers, or a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group or any type of social channel. They can now take the Jiva URL, the landing page, and find patients from any of these social channels to self-service, uh, self-check their eligibility, and self-enroll in a clinical study.
That is amazing. Amazing to get access like that. It's funny because I've interviewed different people who are saying that they're using, tools like this. Is the clearest explanation that I've heard you that I've that I've heard, so far in this space in terms of, how it works. And absolutely sounds amazing. I tell my wife all the time the only reason why I need Facebook is because of my hobbies. I don't I don't really use Facebook for connecting and communicating and all those things. I typically use LinkedIn for my professional connections, and for my social connections I call them. So that's how I stay up to date with most people.
Yeah.
So whenever patients are in there, then does it mean that the patients are directly interacting with you more or less through Jiva as well? I mean, is that how the patient interaction happens?
So essentially, once the patients are listed as contacts within the Jiva system, they are their data is protected and restricted only to this one particular clinical study. And
Mhm.
whoever is the administrator of that study will manage all their data, and it's not visible to anybody else. And it's a two-factor authentication to even get a login, and they can choose which users have what level of authorization to access the type of data with the identifiable information or without identifiable information. They can mask and redact the documents and data within the software easily by essentially selecting the roles and permissions. So now within this, they can communicate, the patient can communicate by video, audio, text, email, And same thing, any of the study users at a site can communicate with the patients. So it's a bidirectional, which is also very recent. If you look at it, because historically it's not been, if it's bidirectional, it's asynchronous, and someone has a phone number they need to call, and stuff like that. Whereas here it's a single platform, single application where both sites can interact with each other. Um,
Very interesting. Yeah. And so then, in terms of getting patients to follow specific protocols, the researchers can do that from your platform as well.
That's correct. They can set a schedule of events. Typically you have a table, right? A chart which shows on day 1, day 5, day 10, what activities need to occur. And you basically set a schedule of events, and set reminders. Do you want to send reminder by text, reminder by email? Do you want an automatic recorded audio message to be sent to these patients? Imagine a 10,000 or a 40,000 patient study, as in the case of a vaccine study, or in very small population rare disease study. The scale is massive, and the larger the population, you don't have the luxury of picking up the phone and calling manually. So you want to be able to do as much automation and let the system drive these recurring reminders and alerts to ensure people don't forget, because in remote and virtual environment it's very easy to miss appointments. I have missed a couple in the last few months. Just I'm sitting right in front of the computer, I'm working on my emails, and I forget that I had an appointment, and unless I get a beep. So
Right.
those types of things can all be set a one time. You say, here is a monthly recurring uh, telemedicine visit, and I need reminder to go out 7 days in advance, 1 day in advance, 1 hour in advance, right? So that way you have multiple reminders set at once, and for a 5-year study you don't have to touch it again if you choose to do so, or you can do 1 year at a time, whichever way.
It's, I mean, it's just great to have that capability so that you can, um, more or less pre program a lot of this. We know that researchers have a lot on their plates and a lot of different things going on, especially with all the different patients that could be enrolled in a clinical trial. So, good to hear. Okay, so there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
My daughter that I lost to this rare disease, and my younger brother, about 3-4 years ago, my younger brother in his 30s, to a chronic disease that he battled for almost 16 years, and complications that came out of it. So I lost him when he was in his 30s, in 2017. That's when I decided to take the entrepreneurial route full time and quit my job, a paycheck, and went into starting Jiva, and see what difference I can make. So my daughter and brother continue to inspire me, and they are just examples of patients that in my own family. But I'm everyone goes through these human challenges. With my brother being in India, I I was here going through my education and career, and I was not able to do enough caregiving to him in a virtual environment. Looking at all the tools that are available today, I think I could have helped him a lot more. Help him find and enroll in a clinical study, because the standard of care was not good enough to manage his lifestyle disease. His lifespan could have been significantly extended with the right technologies. And with my daughter, I think advocacy is also very important. Getting the right policy changes for early diagnosis, early treatment options, faster treatment options, access to clinical trial. All these are very important. So it's a combination of advocacy and technology innovation that I think needs to happen, along with many other things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, it sounds like you've taken that sort of the scars of personal tragedy and turned them into to to things that could possibly help others. So thank you for that. What concerns you?
Lethargy and complacency. We tend to become complacent in whatever we are doing in playing our role in the ecosystem. I think we are in a very good spot where we are. We can be very satisfied and complacent about it, or be restless and strive for how we can make it better. And so that restlessness is what really drives innovation and change. And complacency is the enemy of restlessness and change.
Yeah, and it's funny because the one thing I was telling my wife recently is this sort of idea of staying static where you are is a really tough thing for me. It's just naturally challenging, but I know it's not for her as well. She kind of likes the stability, and so there's that balance of how do you find stability, but also continue to test the limits of where you currently are.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And what excites you?
The opportunity ahead of us to really revolutionize clinical trials. If you see the mainstream in life science industry today, you will see decentralized clinical trials is a huge attention towards the opportunity to do home-based clinical trials, home-based sample collection, and pretty much that's really, while the technology to do that has existed for 15 years or so now, it has not actually happened because of complacency or the feeling that status quo is better than change. But now, with the COVID-19, ensuring continuity and integrity of clinical research during the pandemic and beyond has really driven this change and adoption and excitement in the industry at large. So that's what I'm most excited about, and also being in the right place at the right time, I think, which was not planned at all. It was just happened to be that way. But I think that brings a huge responsibility to deliver and be part of the revolution that's unfolding in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, a very good answer because I think timing is everything, and I think there's a lot going on in artificial intelligence. There's so much going on in the gene editing space, and sort of understanding more and more about personal diagnostics. But in addition to that, it's the delivery. How do you make sure that you can still reach people even whenever it's challenging to reach people? And
Yeah.
so, your area of, with Jiva and what you guys are focusing on is absolutely critical.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So, Harsha Rajashima, thank you so much for spending time with me today on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me, Don. Truly my pleasure. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much.
You too.